All right, listen up, y'all.
Greetings, everybody. This is Mr. Abdullah, your host and educator, with another episode of All Things Education Official. If you like what you hear, if you like what you're learning, or if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to leave that in the comment box. Meanwhile, please like, share, and subscribe. Once again, that's like, share, and subscribe if you like what you're hearing. If you don't like what you're hearing, please feel free to leave that in the comment box and like, subscribe, and share. Today, we'll be discussing Florida's new teaching standards that say African Americans have received some personal benefit from slavery, and the response from some of the educators as well as the parents in Florida.
And at least one of them raped a slave.
Right.
But this seems to be the framing here, which is that slave owning in America wasn't as bad as it was elsewhere. The slaves that were owned were born into slavery.
Right.
And the people who owned them did so reluctantly.
Right.
All right. As you can see, Florida has decided that it is best to teach all of the children of their constituents that slavery was a personal benefit because the slaves actually benefited from the knowledge and skills that they gained from working in the system of chattel slavery. According to a political article, it says here, Florida education officials approved new standards for teaching African American history Wednesday in response to the anti-woke policies touted by Governor Ron DeSantis, as critics urged the state to rethink the curriculum, claiming that it only presents half the story and half the truth. The new standards, backed unanimously by the State Board of Education, encompassed a controversial 2022 law regulating how race can be taught in Florida schools, something that was specifically sought by the Republican governor and presidential contender. Well, we all know that a lot of the states in our union have not caught up socially, mentally, or realistically as to what should be taught in public education. In this particular instance, Florida has gone out of their way to make it law, which I find to be extremely interesting considering Florida's entrenched history with chattel slavery and the effects afterwards during Reconstruction. You're talking about Jim Crow. In this particular instance, Florida cannot even discuss massacres such as the Ocoee massacre, the Rosewood massacre. These are all things that have happened directly in Florida, which its residents' children will not be allowed to be taught. I find this to be traumatizing for the children. It's extremely traumatic for the future of these children. Reason why I say this is because these children will not be allowed to be given the full opportunity to understand the country in which they live. I was reading an article and it stated something that's very, very profound. It said, if children from Germany can learn the torrid history of the Second and Third Reich and Hitler, then white children in America can learn the history of chattel slavery. What I find also to be extremely interesting is that even though the curriculum calls for first sources to be very, very important, it seems that first sources will not be reviewed nor revealed to these children when questionable information is given. Many, many articles have shown that the larger, broader constituency is against this type of curriculum. And since we recognize it is now part of the law, we need to start looking at other alternatives to educating our children. Now, we're talking about not just foundational Black American children, who I believe are on the front line of learning and should be on the front line of learning an alternate curriculum. We're talking about all children in this state, and in particular, those with disabilities. They need to be given an alternative, and that is where microschooling comes in. And I'd like you to get an understanding that this is something that I was recently introduced to, so let's roll that clip.
I do believe our children did face some trauma. We did see that when we opened in January. A lot of the traumas of children just getting back into a routine, re-socializing. The children who were so out of touch and isolated, that was quite a challenge at first.
Yeah, with all the chaos of COVID, some parents are really searching for ways to give their kids a different kind of education.
And some are pulling their students out of public schools and instead taking them to what's known as a micro school. Brittany Thomason explains how they work kind of like group homeschools.
MicroSchools are basically classrooms filled with 5 to 10 students. They're taught by what's called learning guides, and they go to school 5 days a week for 5 hours a day.
Enrolling her kids in a micro school felt like a no-brainer to Kylie Chambley.
Wishy-washy, in the lack of better terms, and especially with what's going on in the public schools, we're already hearing of people shutting down.
President Janelle Wood with the Black Mothers Forum says her group started micro schools for K-8 children. Wood says they work a lot like group homeschools. By next week, you'll find 11 classrooms throughout the valley in places like churches and charter schools.
We've actually gained in enrollment due to the pandemic. Because of the up and down ebbs and flows within the traditional system, people want steady.
The micro schools are taught by learning guides, many of them former teachers. They don't need a degree, but Wood says they go through training and use an online curriculum. As a former teacher, Kylie oversees the guides and their lesson plans. The mom believes her kids are getting the best education for them.
And they're also in an environment with kids that look like them. They don't have to worry on a social emotional level of not fitting in with the group. So that has been really powerful for my children.
The MicroSchools are free for students. You can find out more information on how to register on the AZ Family app. In Mesa, Brittany Thomason, Arizona's Family.
Microschooling, I believe, is a wonderful thing. It is the next step past just charter schools. Charter schools have been infiltrated into the system. They've been implemented into the system. So now charter schools are starting to look just like public educational institutions, just traditional district-run public institutions. I find that they do not offer as often as they should an alternative to the state given curriculum, which is proposed by lawmakers and not educators. If you'd like more information, check my past video. I also find that microschooling gives a much more personal feel, much more intimate feel, and can serve particular needs and groups. And what I find is that even though this is something that we recognize that should be done statewide, it is done statewide, but I think particularly in Florida, and for those parents, for some of my listeners who are in Florida, there is a website, microschoolflorida.com. If you are interested in microschooling, please check out that website. Microschooling can range from $4,000 to $8,000 a year, and some instances they're free. So you have to check out your particular site. I think that it is very, very important that we find these alternatives so that our children can be aware what they're given is not beneficial. What they're being given is not beneficial. Please find a way to implement proper education to our children. And this policy in Florida just ain't it. Once again, this policy just ain't it. Once again, this is Mr. Abdullah with another episode of All Things Education Official. What do you think about Governor Ron DeSantis's policy regarding the benefits of slavery to enslaved Africans and indigenous people? And also, what do you think about microschooling as a response to said policies, not just in Florida, but across the country? Feel free to leave that in the comment box. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or ideas, or things you'd like to see discussed on All Things Education Official, please feel free to email me at info@allthingseducator.com. Once again, that's info@allthingseducator.com. Once again, you are dismissed.
Yeah! You are all expurgated.